Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 12th of May 2021. Coming to you from Norfolk and the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G0KYA. Lovely to see you. On tonight's show, the Hale Cycle. Is this the magic propagation we have been waiting for? Find out which NARC member has won this prestigious award. And we find out who works from a shack like this. Firstly, then, it's congratulations to Andy M0NKR for winning this wonderful trophy awarded by CDXC at their convention and AGM last weekend for the CDXC LF Challenge, Low Frequency Challenge. Andy won joint leading 160 metre station. So a real congratulations and well done, Andy, for that. I know you put a lot of work in, and I believe this was your first year at going on Top Band. So well done for achieving such an award in your first time on that band. Now we've got a message from Ken M0KJW. It says the Samuel F. Morse Amateur Radio Club. So Morse, that's immediately got a lot of people watching and listening. Is a Sacramento, California-based CW enthusiast club, and they wanted a special time to bring bug operators together on the air. In the same spirit as ARRL's Straight Key Night, participants are encouraged to make simple, conversational, chewing the fat QSOs using their bug-type key. This is not a contest. However, there's a very easy and quick registration form found at https, well, I'll let you read it off there, https://w6sfm.com/bug-roundup. We'll put that on our newsletter as well. So if you have a bug type key and you're interested, this would make a great evening or event. Now the event starts on Saturday, May 22nd. Now this might be the problem for some of you. It starts at 0100 BST. I've worked it out, converting from their times. So it started actually at midnight GMT. So it's 0100 BST on Saturday and concludes on Monday, May 23rd at 100 BST. Actually, I think that should be Sunday, May 22nd. At 0100 and concludes Monday, May 23rd BST. Anyway, full details are on that website there. Why are you smiling, Steve?
I'm just smiling. You're getting all your times.
Well, I know it was complicated because they were converting between some, but they didn't quote BST, British Summertime, so I thought I'd better. And that's where I got in a muddle. So anyway, for more information to register your station and everything else, go to that web address. I would say we will put it on our website. Still on Morse. This is becoming a Morse special.
Is it? Okay, special. Perhaps we should have another Morse special. No? Okay. Shh.
No, never mind that. Stuart G0KYA says more Morse from Popular Mechanics magazine. If you've been to the States and you've been to their news agents, you'll see they have a wonderful magazine called Popular Mechanics. It's a bit like the scientific, what's it called? New Scientist. A little bit like that, but a bit more practical engineering and things. Anyway, this is from them. And this is a story about how dementia patients used Morse code training to escape from a senior living facility. It's not fun. This is real true.
Really?
It's really true. In a scene straight out of a spy movie, an elderly couple reportedly escaped from an assisted living facility using some cunning military exercise and an antiquated telecommunications method. Now that is not my words. Stuart did warn us, but I'm going to quote from the magazine. That's what they said. A resident of a secure memory unit in Elmcroft of Lebanon, a Tennessee nursing facility, eloped with his wife from the premises, according to a state report on the incident. A stranger spotted the residents, who were safe, walking 2 blocks from Elmcroft about 30 minutes after they left, and picked them up and took them back. After the couple returned to Elmcroft, the staff asked them how they pulled off their stunt, since employees must use a numeric code on a keypad to exit the locked memory care unit. Now, I know you must be thinking it's Morse, but no. The man said he'd previously worked with Morse code in the military, and his ear was well trained enough to figure out the code on the pad from the sounds it made. He reportedly duplicated the numbers to unlock the door. I guess
That's like a telephone,
exactly,
isn't it?
Yeah. They're called DTMF tones.
Yeah.
And he memorised the tones and worked out what the tones were from his Morse code training. Anyway, the man listened to the codes on the facilities keypad made when the staff struck certain keys, memorised it. A major security risk on outmoded technology, it says. Well, I must admit, I thought DTMF was still a thing. It certainly is when you're doing, when you're accessing repeaters and things like that through our amateur radio. But of course, there's an example of where someone escaped straight out of Spooks, that, isn't it? Or dare I mention, Line of Duty.
Line of Duty,
Could have been something like that.
Could be.
So anyway, that's older technology, but how Morse training helped them escape this facility. Now, just going to tell you about a few other things happening. We've got our Tonight to Date webinar that Tammy and I produce for the RSGB every month. We thought you might be interested in. It's on this coming Monday at 8 o'clock, and it's all about amateur radio direction finding. Now, most of this is going to be about direction finding on foot, but of course a lot of the techniques and the technologies and everything are all going to be relevant as well. And there's Bob Tidrington and also a couple of guests I know coming on. We're doing a rehearsal on Saturday, but that's live at 8 o'clock on Monday on the RSGB YouTube channel and the BATC stream. You can get more information by looking at rsgb.org/webinars. And I also heard from Richard M6UES, who last night found he was watching a programme and he thought would be of interest to members called Codebreakers, Bletchley Park's Lost Heroes. It was on BBC4. This is something I found earlier and just copied it. That's a page that you can find on iPlayer to watch it again. It's going to be on live at 2:30 in the morning. If you're not up there at 2:30 tomorrow morning, as it were, you'll be able to watch it. It says there are 29 days left to watch.
You need to get your videotape out and video it.
Videotape? That coming from you, young lady, honestly. Right, anyway, yes. But you could record it or watch it on iPlayer. But that does look of interest. And we have had trips to Bletchley Park, of course, in the past. So that looks good. Now, did we get loads of, a sack of letters this week that I've missed, maybe, Tammy? You know, letters of complaint or, you know, missing something? No?
No.
I just wondered, because last week I mentioned a certain train.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I didn't know the number.
Yeah.
We had lots of people putting me right. It is 7. I've memorised this. No, I actually knew it, but I'd kind of forgotten it in the moment. Yes, I did. Britannia, it was 70,000, and that's what I showed a picture of by mistake. What really, it was Oliver Cromwell, 700,13.
So you can't even remember.
No, I'm going to say it right. Okay. Now, why it's a shameful that I actually couldn't even remember the numbers, because I don't have many paintings as such. This is actually a print. We're going to show you this. Can we show Tammy the picture on our dining room wall is this. It's one of my favourite pictures. It's a print. There are 5 of 750, and it's by a local artist. I think he comes from Wyndham. Nick Hardcastle. Now look at that though, isn't that beautiful? There's the number boldly there at Norwich Station as well. There's a Class 31 just on the right as well, diesel.
Is there? Okay.
This could of course be just an excuse to show a train again.
I think it might be actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is on our wall at home, and I thought I'd share that with you. It's a lovely picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, Tammy?
Yes, it's lovely. Yes. I look at it every day.
Yes. All right. Okay, Tammy. Over to you, little people.
Well, as we're on train theme today.
Oh.
It's called the Vaccination Train. So
very topical.
Yeah,
that kind of looks like a sort of tube train, isn't it?
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it?
It is very, and I love the buildings are made of the
hand gel.
Hand gels and things, yeah.
I thought that was apt today.
It is. Yeah.
There you go.
There we go. Lots of those, as we've told you, we tell you every week, and acknowledging the website miniature-calendar.com for more of those sort of pictures. Thanks for that, Tammy. Very apt indeed. So what have you been doing at home? And we know some of you have been watching telly, because you told us about that, the Bletchley Park film. That looks good. Let us know. Drop us an email to this address, radio@dcpmicro.com. By the very latest, we need things by 3 o'clock on a Wednesday, because that's when we start putting the programme together and the running order, etc. But you can send it to us at any time before that, and we'd love to hear from you. Now it's time for that competition that I thought we might finish at Christmas, but I still get sent them, which is brilliant. But I literally have 2 more at the moment after this. So if you haven't sent your shack in yet, just got 2 more weeks of these.
It's week 58.
58, is it?
Yep.
So we're going to get to 60.
Yep.
But let's have a look at last week's shack. Again, did you know who this was? We had a few guesses. There were some clues there, you know, if you think about it. Very well-known member of the club. Let's go through who guessed. Mike G0KYA said, is it Steve G0KYA shack?
Chris G4CCX says, is it Steve G0KYA shack?
Ken M0KJW, I'm smiling because I'm looking at a little screen. I'll tell you why in a minute. Ken M0KJW says, is it James M0ZAH's shack?
Okay, so Bob G8STU, Mark G0LGJ, John G8VPE and Colin M0GMK all say, is it Steve G0KYA shack?
And is it? Let's have a look whose shack it is.
I can reveal that it is Steve's shack.
It is Steve.
Yay.
And we're going to see him later. Can I say that at this point?
Yes, yeah. Why not?
He's sitting on another screen that we can see, and he's been smiling there. So most of you got that right. Well done if you got that right. It was Steve G0KYA shack. So let's have a look at then. This is almost the penultimate shack so far.
Well, so far. You've been saying that for about 6 months now.
Yeah,
so.
Anyway, let's have a look and see whose shack it is this week. Who works from a shack like this? Busy shack, I think. That would be fair to say. Look at the rigs on there. I can recognise the one at the top. That's a Kenwood 710, lovely radio. We've both got one of them in our cars, haven't we?
Yep.
But it isn't one of us, we could tell you that much. Look at all the mics hanging up. Is that a clue? All those mics hanging up like that? I'll let you wonder about that. I'm not going to say any more. Have a think. Who do you think works from a shack like this? If we don't get many guesses in the next couple of days, I'll put a clue on the newsletter. But see if you can guess who would feel at home with that many hang-up mics, eh? As always, drop us a line to radio@dcpmicro.com. By 3 o'clock next Wednesday, see if you can guess whose shack that is. Someone we haven't seen for a while, but then we haven't seen most of you for a while, actually, thinking about it. But a member of the club and well known as well. So let's just to go through what's happening next week at Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. On Sunday, we've got GB2RS, of course meant for all radio amateurs and shortwave listeners, at 7 o'clock on GB3NB. On Monday the 17th of May, the Monday Night Net this week is the title, or the main subject we're going to talk about is Electric Vehicles, Love Them or Loathe Them. I got that only just about half an hour ago. That's what it's going to be about. It's on GB3NB at 7:30, hosted by Steve G3EVA. At 8:30, it's the 80-metre CW Net. And on Wednesday, the 19th of May, NARC Live, back here. It's what we're calling Spring View. And this is what it's all about. Your pictures, okay? They don't have to be stunning sort of pictures with fancy cameras and everything. Look at that picture there, for example, of a beautiful sunset, I guess that is, taken with a regular camera phone.
I think all these are just on an iPhone camera.
Yeah, just on an iPhone. So there we are. It just shows you the wonderful pictures that you can get in spring. I hope you've been collecting them. Already some of you have sent things to me, which is wonderful, but you've got until, I will say 3 o'clock next Wednesday, but please send them earlier if you can, because Tammy and I will start putting this together on Monday/Tuesday. Certainly Tuesday we'll have to, because there'll be lots of them. And the whole programme is going to be dedicated to that, apart from the club news at the beginning. So we're looking for you. We're relying on you to send us pictures, videos, or anything else to do with spring and nature and wildlife. Fantastic. We look forward to that, don't we?
We do. My contribution is work in progress at the moment.
Right. Is that with your...
Because I've put my camera out to see what comes in. I've put some bait there in the form of some carrots and some seed and some peanuts and some bread.
Peanuts. Who'd like peanuts then?
Jay likes the peanuts, doesn't he?
Okay. And the, squirrels?
Squirrels.
Well, they shouldn't be.
Yep.
Okay. So there's plenty of time for you to get your pictures to us. Doesn't matter as long as they're yours. If they're not yours, if you find them online, that's probably okay. But you do need to tell us, please, because we show them. And we do honestly get copyright issues because we kind of broadcast this program, which means that anybody can watch it. It's not just a closed Zoom link. It's very important that you tell us if it's not your own picture. just tell us who owned it or where you found it, YouTube, Facebook, whatever. Please tell us that. Now, it's also an interactive evening, and for the first time, we're going to use Zoom instead of GoToMeeting. So we've now got a paid pro Zoom account, and we're going to use that. So it'll be the same sort of format as before, but we think there's lots of advantages with Zoom, technically, for us to be able to share pictures and things from you. So if some of you have got some pictures, we'd encourage you to email them to us if you can. But if some of you got them on your computer and you're familiar with Zoom and you can share your picture, we're going to have a go at showing them live from you, or videos or whatever from your computer screens, all right? Now, as usual, you'll be able to join from about 7 o'clock. Sonny is going to have admin rights and everything to the Zoom as well. So he'll be able to help you check your camera, check your microphone and everything before you join in. But it's mainly about pictures and videos about nature or wildlife, and we look forward to next week. Can't emphasize enough, though, how it's important that you send us things. Thank you. Right, and the other thing, just to let you know then, before we go to our main event tonight, this is our card, our Norfolk Amateur Radio Club card, which we're happy to send to anybody at all you feel would be cheered up in these difficult times for many, whether it's a celebration, a birthday, an anniversary, someone just not feeling very well, maybe someone recovering from an operation or something like that as well. Just let us know, drop an email to the usual address with their address, and we will add your name to ours and send the card to wherever it is. It's radio@dcpmicro.com. There we are. And of course, if you want to know more about the club, you've just happened upon us maybe tonight and wondering what the heck this is all about. We've got our Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, and we've got a web address of www.norfolkamateurradio.org. Marvellous. Now, before we go to tonight's main event, I should explain something to you, how we get a lot of our talks and things. As you can imagine, for the last year or so, and even before, our program secretary, Roger G3LDI, gets lots of his talks by looking online and seeing talks that people have given on YouTube and other things like that. And because they're the sort of speaker, of course, who can give us a talk similarly, either when we're meeting for real or certainly in these COVID times when we're running NARC Live like this. Now, one of the ones that he found was on the Hale Cycle. That was about November time. And he saw a wonderful video presentation given by Dr Scott McIntosh, all about the Hale Cycle and the propagation, and of course the effect it would have on our hobby. Scott gave this presentation to Front Range 6 Meter Group in Colorado. Why am I telling you all this? Well, what Roger did was contact Scott and asked him to do a live presentation, and that was due tonight. Unfortunately, though, Scott, by the way, who is the Deputy Director of the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado in the States, unfortunately something unavoidable came up at work. He let me know on Monday evening, which didn't give us a lot of time, to be honest with you, what to do. And Scott just can't do this presentation to us live. However, what he did do is give his blessing, and also the 6 meter group that he gave the presentation to originally online gave their blessing for us to show you the presentation he gave then, which was exactly the same as Roger saw. And he's also done a little introduction for us on video as well, just to apologise really and explain who he is. He's also promised to come back at a future date to update us, because of course propagation and forecasts are something that changes all the time. So they're explaining all of that means that we're going to be watching a film which we're taking from YouTube very shortly. We'll start that. I just should say, if there is, we don't think there's any adverts that are going to come up during it, but if there are, there's nothing we can do about it. We are watching a YouTube film. We'll also be including the YouTube link of this presentation on there. Now, to make the evening, though, possible, we've never said to you before, don't send questions, but of course Scott won't be here to answer questions live about his presentation. However, propagation is a massive subject, and we're very lucky to have an expert of our own, in our own ranks, of Steve G0KYA, who's chair of the Propagation Studies Committee for the RSGB, and he's agreed to join us live afterwards to take general questions on propagation. So we're in for a double feature evening really. We're going to watch a presentation about the Hale Cycle first, and then we're going to be joined by Steve live straight afterwards for questions that you have on any aspects of propagation. I'm sure he'll be happy to try and answer for you. But first, let's hear Scott's introduction. Now, I should say he did this last night, literally. So I woke up this morning, got into work, and found this video sitting there. Unfortunately, there's an audio problem on it, and so he also planned to do a little update to his presentation for us. Unfortunately, the audio we don't feel is good enough for that. But we're going to play his short introduction to the presentation. We're going to come back to me, and then we'll show you the whole film. So hopefully you'll enjoy it, and let's first hear from Scott.
And good evening, everyone. This is Scott McIntosh. I just wanted to apologise most profusely for not being able to give this update to the presentation in person, but hopefully you'll enjoy what is shown to you and enjoy this further update. And I will also look forward to coming back to talking to you guys at some point in the future. So I'm not going to hang around. So
now we're just going to fade it there because he did go on to give a quick update, which we would have put at the end of showing you the film, which is a lot shorter than the actual full presentation that he gave. But as you could hear probably from that, the audio wasn't great, and in fact we watched it earlier and we played it to Steve in fact earlier as well, and we decided that it's really not good enough to play you. If though you'd like to hear and see the update that he did after this, if you drop me an email in the next few days, we'll upload it to a sort of private link and let you be able to watch it in your own time. But the audio is not great and you can't hear everything he says, unfortunately. But it was good of him to at least record a little apology and a promise that he's going to come back and give us a full talk as well and an update in the future, because this is an 11-year cycle, as you'll learn. So there's plenty of time to see if things are going to schedule or not to what he thinks is going to happen. Anyway, without further ado, we're now going to play this presentation in whole. It's the first time we've done something like this, really. So probably not best to ask questions about it here because we can't answer them. Scott isn't here to answer them either live. But afterwards, as I said, there will be a lovely Q&A session generally about propagation, and we'll ask Steve to help us with that afterwards. But first, here's the presentation, and this is Scott McIntosh, Deputy Director of the National Centre for Atmospheric Research.
So here we go, okay? So, like, I always give this crap introduction, this talk about these three old dead guys. And the story is really about these three dead white guys and their contribution to solar physics and statistics and mathematics, and how each one of them has kind of influenced our work that we've been doing over the last decade. We made a discovery about probably the middle of 2011, and it took us 3.5 years to publish it. Such was the fervent joy amongst my peers as to what it meant. We've been tracking that prediction since then, and it hasn't budged one single bit. So I'll walk through that a little bit. I'll probably jump over bits, but if I'm not given enough detail, just holler. So the old dead white guy on the left is a guy called David Hilbert. He's a very famous mathematician. The guy on the right is George Ellery Hale. He's a very famous astrophysicist. In fact, he invented the field of solar physics. And the dude in the middle, I don't know, he's just a bit part in this show. And his name is Charles Tree, Chree. He's a fellow Scot. And he was the director of Kew Observatory round about the time of, I think he was maybe a PhD student around the time of Carrington. So if you know the Carrington flare, and so he was in charge of all the magnetometers and things like that in the UK. And he has a very interesting track record, but he's very, very famous for one thing. And that one thing has been stolen by the meteorologists. So we'll get there in a little bit. So maybe we'll try and recover that kind of statistical brilliance for the solar physics community, since that's where it originally came from. Just want to give credit to my co-workers and colleagues. They're listed at the bottom. And a lot of this work is actually a credit to folks that unbeknownst to me, published similar work in the 80s. Back in the day when they had a lot of data, they were very careful with their data. There was a paper, when we were writing up our discovery in 2011, I was 95% of the way through the paper when I realized that someone had published something quite similar in 1988. In fact, they published it in Nature, and it was like a dirty secret. So all of my colleagues knew about it, but the paper only had a tiny number of citations. So usually that's an indicator that everybody knows about it because it impacts their work, but nobody cites it because of the danger of citing it, because of the implications that it has for what they do. But, I was trained to challenge everything. So what you're going to see is a very non-conventional approach to understanding the sun. So I'm going to go into this beautiful movie that was built by my colleagues in Norway, and it was a full disk image. And the idea here is just to set the scene that these are not sunspots. These are just small pores. The scale on the side of the image is changing rapidly. I'm going to play it again. So from full disk, we come in and zoom in on that small set of pores. And of course, you'll all probably know that sunspots are a magnetic object. And in fact, our star, the sun, is a very, very magnetic object of its own. And in fact, it's that magnetism that gives rise to a lot of the disturbances that my old lab is particularly worried about, because that magnetic field gets tossed around in the large spaghetti pot of the interior of the sun. It gets twisted, it erupts, and some of those eruptions hit the Earth. And that was my old job, was to understand and predict when those were going to happen and what impact they would have on us. Now, Paul was on another talk last night, and I'm sure they showed a movie like this or one very similar to it. And what it is a tracing out of the sun's magnetic field over time. So after it's traced out the central meridian of the sun, it's to play through. And so you're watching just the evolution of the sun's magnetic field and this bizarre phenomenon called the Hale Cycle. So the sun is kind of well known for having 11-year sunspot cycle, but not so many people know that the sun also has a 22-year magnetic polarity cycle. So if you think about that in the context of the Earth's magnetic field reverses, but it does so on a time scale of about 100,000 years. So, however, the object at the center of the solar system has a magnetic field that flips every 22 years. So, and believe it or not, is as regular as clockwork. So, one thing to take out of this movie is that these magnetic fields, they may look random, but they're not. Where these magnetic field things, the blue and yellow things, pop up is not random. There's an element of randomness to it, but it's what I'm going to show you that it's highly organized at a global scale. The other thing to bear in mind here is that these objects, which are of the scale of about 5,000, about 1,000 to 5,000 Gauss in strength, are the literal tip of the iceberg. And so if I get to that point, hopefully I'll get to that point much later, you'll maybe understand a little bit more what I'm talking about. But this is a pretty beautiful movie. It's built over 30 years. So, as I said earlier, the sun spots wax and wane in number over the timescale of about 11 years. And that, from this plot that's on the top here, you'll see that, the periodicity of this solar cycle, the sunspot cycle, varies everywhere from 8 years to 13 years. Actually, there's a 14-year long cycle. And on top of that, the envelope, the modulation of the sunspot cycle goes up and down. So it produces events like happened around the turn of the 19th century, which we call the Dalton minimum. And then there was another mini kind of minimum in the late 1880s, early 1900s, before it peaked in 1956, I guess, was the top of Cycle 19. The Cycle 19 played havoc with the early Apollo missions and with the Mercury, Redstone, Gemini program, and all kinds of other fun stuff. But anyway, so this is a truly age-old puzzle. The puzzle being, how does this sunspot cycle work? And I'll tell you, there's at least, there is at least 250 years of observations. There's probably at least 250 published solutions to that puzzle, maybe 250,000. And, if you are or are not aware, there's probably at least 250 predictions what the next sunspot cycle is going to look like. And I'll tell you that they're probably all wrong. Because nobody truly knows what this monster is going to do. And anyone that's tried to predict its behavior in the past was, wrong. So I'm going to dial in a little bit further and only show you the last 22 years. Actually, it's the last 24 years of data. I'll point out a few things. So the top plot is the daily sunspot number. And there's a few things you can point out here. Black trace is the total number. And I've separated the two hemispheres in red and blue, north and south. One of the things you'll notice is that is not very smooth. There are massive excursions on this plot that aren't the subject of this talk. And you'll notice that over the time scale of about a year, there's a massive oscillation on top of what would be considered to be a pretty smooth variation. You'll see that some of those peaks and troughs are in the northern hemisphere and some are in the southern hemisphere. And if I look down to the distribution of spots that I show below, you'll see clusters where it's very intense. If I look at the start of 2012, for example, a very intense cluster of sunspots in 2012. And a very strong asymmetry between the two peaks of cycle 24. Not only that, of course, is the drop in cycle 24, but the issue here, the thing to grasp here are these massive surges in sunspot production. Those also are not random. And believe it or not, they're to do with similar effects going on inside the sun, like the Gulf Stream and the jet stream on Earth. So on my first slide, talk about buoyancy. Buoyancy is a very important phenomenon when it comes to sunspots. And so just like features in the Earth's atmosphere, buoyancy of air parcels becomes important for weather, and it's also critical for what goes on inside the sun, especially its magnetic fields, which tend to be buoyant. They have their own pressure. One of the things that we're worried about right now is, when does sun's solar minimum end? And I'll tell you that a lot of my colleagues don't really know what solar minimum is. They define it as being minimum of the production of sunspots, and that's fine, but it doesn't mean a lot physically. Because if I put a map in my sunspots of what the Hale cycle looks like. So this is the 22-year magnetic variability of the star. So the red and blue here is a theme that you'll see throughout the talk. And it shows the progression of different magnetic polarities, blue being negative, red being positive, and how they interact with one another. And so you'll instantly notice something very peculiar about solar minimum. So if sunspot minimum is here between 2007 and 2010, there are 4 oppositely signed magnetic bands within 35 degrees of the sun sector. Our hypothesis that we came up with in 2011, was that those 4 bands basically cancel one another, right? The magnetic fields always want to cancel each other out. It's one of Maxwell's laws that magnetic fields always want to cancel. And so these magnetics basically cancel each other out until it comes to a point in time where the magnetic field basically dies. If I was back in late 1997, the magnetic field at the equator basically dies, and instantly we see sunspots popping up at mid-latitudes, right? But the difference is that the band on which those sunspots form had actually been around for about a decade before that, okay? So what you're looking at is a large-scale interacting magnetic system, and it always wants to cancel itself out, right? So it's almost always in balance. And remember that later, because remember I said that we're only looking at the tip of the iceberg, right? So what you're basically looking at with sunspots is the imbalance in the system, not the actual magnetic field at the bottom. You're only looking at the difference, okay? Just bear that in mind. So sunspot minimum ends when a Hale cycle ends. So this 22-year cycle comes to the equator, it dies. When it dies, it gives rise to the new sunspot cycle. Here's more data to illustrate what that means. So I'm going to show you the overlap. So what's on the bottom of this plot is a schematic, right? It was drawn based on measurements that we took. The top plot, the plot on the right is part of the data that we used to construct that. And these are tiny little active regions on the sun. The sun is completely pockmarked with them like a teenager. And what we're looking at, if you look at the 2007 to 2012 timeframe on this plot, you'll notice that these magnetic bands clearly overlap. Now, if I go back here and you look at just the trails of sunspots, there doesn't seem to be any appreciable overlap at all. But at smaller scale magnetic features, that overlap can be almost as much as 6 years. In fact, it's much more than that. But on this measurable, it's 6 years. Now, I'm going to clue in. If you look around 2011, you look at the equator, do you see something rather abrupt that happened? The equator has a bunch of these features that we call EUV bright points, and all of a sudden, none. And right after that none is exactly when the big sunspots appeared in late 2011, or sorry, in middle of 2011. That event is basically signaling to us that the magnetic field of the Hale cycle just died. So when the Hale cycle ends, this is the kind of behavior that the sun exhibits. I'll show you another nice example of that, but I'm going to show you an animation of how these triggers work with respect to sunspot production. So again, our schematic shown, and over the top of it, I've plotted two different kinds of data. You don't need to worry about the green one, but just look at the spots. So you can see that the interplay between these overlapping magnetic systems, that the sunspots are basically riding on them, okay? So you can think of, you guys are radio wonks, so you can think this is just one big interference pattern, right? Why is the event that happened in 2011 so significant? Well, what basically happened with the sun is its magnetic environment changed in a heartbeat. And right here, I'm showing one particular measure of the sun's corona. So you guys may be familiar with the F10, 10.7 centimeter radial flux that they measure up in Canada and a few places around the globe. It basically measures the activity level of the sun's corona. And that then gives rise to models of ionization in the ionosphere, et cetera, et cetera. And so you guys, when F10.7 kicks up above 90, you get nice transmission around the world. But what happened with the sun on February the 11th, 2011, or there or thereabouts, with the corona, the radiation from the corona increased by 85% almost overnight. That sounds ridiculous, but it's true. over a span of 2 weeks, an object the size of the sun basically went into overdrive. Okay, the magnetic field just changed. And so when we tried to publish this, now we published this late last year, or middle of 2018, but it was another one of these uphill struggles. Nobody could believe that the global scale magnetic field of a star could evolve this quickly. The other interesting part of this work is that when you look, the sun's a bit like an onion. And when you look at different layers of the onion, they respond in different ways to what you're doing with the magnetic field. Below about 1 million degrees, so the sun's outer atmosphere peaks at around 5 million degrees. Below about 1 million degrees, there's only about a 5% change in the atmosphere before or after this magical event, right? Above 1 million degrees, it peaks out at that 85% mark, but the corona really goes through a step. It takes 10 years to recover from that step. Okay, so it basically lights up and it's on. If we go back in time, so I'm now looking at 2 sunspot cycles now. If I look at the flux of the 10.7 centimeter radial flux, and we focus in again, look at February 11th, 2011, F10.7 just jumped through the roof. And it pretty much never came back again. Okay? So you can see these basically step functions in the data are the signature of these Hale cycle endpoints. When the Hale cycle ends, the magnetic field erupts. Okay? Now I'm showing you 6 of them. Okay, so I've gone from 1 to 2 because it wasn't good enough for my peers. 2 wasn't good enough. 5 was marginal, just lucky. If you start to look at F10.7, the record of daily S is the weekly average F10.7, you see these step functions in the data. Those step functions coincide with the end of Hale cycles and the start of what is known as the butterfly wings. This is the infamous butterfly plot, right, of Maunder, where if you look at it side on, these look like butterfly wings. The butterfly's wings start at about 30 degrees latitude, but they coincide with this event at the equator that we have called the Terminator. Basically, because it's the termination of Hale cycles, but it also gives you an opportunity to put big pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger on the screen. So there's 5 of them. There's 13 of them. And so if you go back 140 years, you can notice something else when you look at different solar phenomenology. Now, if any of you have looked at a lot of images of the sun, there's this feature that appears around the edge of the sun called a prominence. And, like all good astronomers, they use very obvious language to describe stuff. And the reason they call them prominences is because they look very prominent against the disk of the sun when you look at them in a certain wavelength. Can someone mute, please? Okay. So I'm going to show you the filament record over the same time frame. Okay. This is the filament density record over 140 years. So this goes all the way back to the dawn of photography. You'll notice a few things. 1, you'll see our terminator points in. But 2, if I encourage you to look at high latitudes, you see these beautiful wispy excursions. Okay. In the late 60s, they discovered these things, and they associated with them with the start of the sun's magnetic reversal process. So basically, they assumed that the sun's magnetic field evolved from about 55 degrees latitude, moved towards the equator, and then the polarity flipped. So that every 22 years, basically, this process happened. There's a small caveat to that. If I look now at the data again, and I only plot the highest latitude prominence in the system, you'll see how beautifully regular it is. And also, you'll notice that the magnetic field basically sits at about 55 degrees latitude and makes that excursion one time. So it sits at 55 degrees latitude, something happens at the equator, and boom, off it goes towards the pole. It resets itself, boom, there it goes. It's the clockwork. So this, whatever's going on in the sun's interior has global effect, right? So when the Hale cycle ends at the equator, not only is its influence felt at mid-solar latitudes, its influence is also met at high solar latitudes. So you're looking at basically a tsunami, right? So you have one event that goes off, and then it transports itself, and the sun changes over the timescale of 1 month. So one solar rotation for us. That is mind-boggling to most astrophysicists. Okay, so I would tell you that 13 of these is just lucky, right? That's what my people tell me. It's just lucky. Okay, 13 of them or 14 of them, just 14 coincidences. Okay, so there's 3 things to establish. This came out of the part of the peer review for this work. Okay, you've done this in a very subjective way. Is there a way you can develop an algorithm? Because usually you try to do the impossible to stop things from getting published. So can you do it algorithmically? Then can you predict when the next termination point will occur? Because in our paper, and it finally got published in 2014, we said it would be probably towards the end or the middle of 2020, right? Based on measurements that we took in 2011, okay? And then one of the things we noticed, and if you pay close attention to the separation between these events, was how does the separation relate to the cycle strength? Because that is the holy grail of maybe not the holy grail of astrophysics. It's an important puzzle for astrophysicists, is to be able to predict what the next solar cycle looks like. And if you look at this quite carefully, you'll notice that when these blue vertical lines are more separated, the amplitude of the sunspot number goes down. And when they're closely packed, the amplitude goes up. Now, if I was to jump back in my slide deck and go back to my schematic, let me go back to here. Okay, actually, I'm going to go to the next one. What we're basically saying is that the degree in overlap between these magnetic systems determines how strong the cycle is going to be. And if the end of my Hale cycle moves too far to the right, it actually starts to interfere with the growth of the next one. Okay, so basically what happens is the cancellation period that is solar minimum basically extends. We can talk a little bit later about how that actually happens, because it could be very odd, but the cancellation basically impacts the ability of the sun to grow spots, okay, because it's all about buoyancy. And buoyancy in the inside of the sun is all about the amount of free magnetic field that you have. So I'm just trying to find my spot here. So let's see if I got through here. All right. So I'm going to set about doing my algorithm. And this is where David Hilbert comes in. And you guys, in dealing with all your signal analysis, probably know about David Hilbert. He wasn't quite as orthogonal, pardon the pun, as Fourier. And he thought that Fourier analysis was limited because it only applied to fixed phase signals. But Hilbert was fascinated with time series analysis, and so he developed a different trick for time series where the phase of the signal so this time series isn't stationary. So the phase is also varying with time. And guess what? The sunspot cycle is one of those types of signals. Even though a lot of my peers will throw Fourier transforms at them to the end of time, okay? Fourier transform probably doesn't even apply. So the top of the plot is my F10.7 signal. This third panel here is the hemispheric sunspot number. And the two things that plot are the outputs of a Hilbert transform to those time series. One is the phase function. The amplitude function. So basically the Hilbert transform is looking for the maximum rate of change of a time series. And so when you've got step functions in your data, you would expect that the amplitude function peaks there. And lo and behold, if I look in F10.7, you'll see that the amplitude function of the Hilbert transform peaks at the termination points. But there's another very interesting phenomena that if you look at the phase function, so how does the phase of the Hilbert transform vary as a function of time? And you'll see that coincidentally, at the termination point, the phase goes through a 360-degree flip. Okay? So the phase slowly varies linearly, and then at the termination point, it flips. Okay? So this is a very characteristic signal. In fact, maybe at the end, we'll come back to this interesting feature in 2003. We have our own suspicions about that, but it's kind of cool how, see how the gradient changes? Something very weird happened in late 2003. But we'll get to that in a bit. So in principle, if I had to take my random time series and just run it through this calculation and figure out when the phase flips, I now have an algorithmic approach to mapping out where all the termination points are. So where are the end of my Hale cycles, right? And I'm going to jump now to use the entire sunspot time series. So you don't need to worry about all the plots here, but the black dots here are the daily value, monthly values, weekly values. The red curve is a smooth version of it. The blue line is a trend of the data. The second panel is when I remove the trend from raw data. The third panel is the amplitude function. So remember, it peaks at the maximum rate of change of the time series. So not at the maximum of sunspot production, but at this time at the bottom where the terminator occurs. And then here's the phase function. And instead, I shifted the phase by 180 degrees. So now instead of looking for where it switches, I'm looking for where it goes through zero. You can do that almost arbitrarily. And these yellow diamonds are the terminator definitions just based on our analysis in 2014. Okay, so basically the algorithmic approach validates what we did. Okay. Now I'm going to do an experiment because you're all really interested in cycle 25. And my hunch was that the separation of these events gives you information. Okay. Now, I'll say it again. Sunspot cycle, the sunspot minimum is the result of interference between 4 magnetic activity bands. Count them. Negative, positive, negative, positive. They're canceling each other out. When the positive and negative ones at the equator die, you get rampant sunspot growth on the 2 remaining bands at mid-latitude. As those evolve in time, they start to feel the influence of the next Hale cycle, then actually turns them down, right? Because you're starting to increase the amount of interference in the system, and that decreases the amount of buoyancy that you have to make bots. Okay? So there's an experiment I want to do with this data. I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to look at the separation of these termination events in time, because that gives me a measure of the overlap in the 2 cycles. Okay? And I'm going to compare it to 2 different things. I'm going to compare it to the sunspot cycle strength in between those 2 terminators, which really makes no sense, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then I'm going to look at the upcoming cycle. Okay, so what does the separation of these 2 tell me about what's going to happen in 2013? Because remember, like I said, the amount of overlap in the system dictates the strength of what you're going to see. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 experiments. The first one, the terminator in between has 0 predictive power. Not shocking, So when I plot all the sunspot maxima from that 270 years of data, all 24 of them, there's no trend. You might as well just plot an average, okay? Now, and some of you may have actually seen this paper, when I plot them versus the upcoming field strength, you get this beautiful relationship. So when the terminators are separated by only a handful of years, you get very high spot amplitudes. That means that the overlap time between the two Hale cycles is small. However, in like cycle 24, and the overlap is large, this quenches the amplitude of the upcoming cycle. Okay? Now you will notice that this technique, this correlation, predicted cycle 24's amplitude identically, which is a fluke. But let me tell you that no one in my community predicted cycle 24 strength accurately at all. And in fact, some of you who have been paying attention may have watched the various press releases in the last year and a half around the NOAA NASA census sunspot cycle 25 prediction. Just for reference, it's this magenta dot. So what you basically see is if we can predict when the next termination event is going to happen, then we can figure out what the separation of the terminator strengths, the separation of the terminators are. And that gives us a remarkably good data-driven prediction of what cycle 25 will look like. Okay? And so based on analysis that we've done, I guess I'm not showing, unless it's on one of the next slides, is that we've timed, we anticipate that the terminator for cycle 24 is actually probably going on right now. The last one happened in February 2011, which means that the cycle strength, the cycle separation, is only somewhere between 9 and 10 years. So even if it goes out to February 2021, that puts the sunspot amplitude somewhere around 225. And that actually means that sunspot cycle 25 could be in the top 6 or 7 of all time. Okay? Now, if you believe the data, I'm a strong believer of data. You know, of course, we're interpreting some of this, and the error bars are not totally huge, but 68% confidence we can say it's going to be around 233 spots, which is double the value predicted by the various numerical models and techniques that were presented to the NOAA and NASA panel last year. Actually, it was a bit longer ago. So just to put that in some reference for you, here is the NOAA NASA projection in orange. It's pretty weeny, looks a lot like cycle 24. Not great for you guys. Probably very good for space infrastructure though. And here's our prediction, which said only really cycle 19 is higher. And I'm going to show you something pretty cool in the next slide. So you also get to appreciate a little bit more. Now I've added algorithmically all these other terminator points. So now you get a better feel for when you're in the Dalton minimum. Look at the separation between these terminators. It's huge. The amplitude gets quenched. Okay? So it's all about how these Hale cycles interact, overlap, and interfere with one another that creates the sunspot cycle. Okay? Those Hale cycles end, and the terminator events are like a trigger. The death of one cycle gives rise to the very rapid growth of activity on the upcoming cycle. The sun's corona, as measured through F10.7 and a host of other things, responds almost immediately. Ridiculous timescale. You can give me a beer too. It'd be good. Hilbert transforms verify the observational analysis from 1860. our early projection on the Hale cycle was May, plus or minus 4 months. We were right at the very end of that bubble. And I'll show you some data at the end that I was, apologies that we had a false start on this presentation, but I ended up getting sick with pink eye and an infection in my jaw at the same time. But it's actually quite good because it looks like the Terminator is happening right now, or if it's not, it will be on the next rotation or there shortly thereafter. So our original projection wasn't too bad, given that nobody's ever done this before. So if I show you the next slide. So I can take the information from my correlation and feed it back in and do a hindcast and basically hindcast what the maximum values were if I just have the Terminator separations and my relationship, okay? So these red dots signify what I would have, if I had just the Terminators, this is what I would recover, okay? And one of the interesting things here is that the method underpredicts. It gets the low ones very well and the mid-range ones because there's statistically more of them. But the larger amplitude cycles, it underpredicts. And so we're wondering if our error bar is off on the low side, that it may well be that if this does happen, our projection for 25 may actually be low, which would be fascinating. So again, looking at something around 230 spots, maybe a slightly less, could be larger. I would argue that those of us that try to protect critical infrastructure, not really ready for a large sunspot cycle. Funding in my field has decayed over the last 30 years, much the same as solar activity had, because nothing is getting fried in space. Interestingly enough, we have the Parker Solar Probe that you may have heard about or seen that's flying around the solar system right now, and it will be a beautiful sensor for that tsunami as it waves itself out through interplanetary space, because this termination event actually does have like a wake that propagates through interplanetary space. So we'll be able to measure that with Parker Probe. Will be pretty awesome. Again, as the Terminator happens, sun's going to go bonkers. One of the things that's a side project that we've been doing is understanding how the Earth's atmosphere responds to those, and it's very interesting for those of you that follow me on Twitter and especially Twitter. You'll know that we actually forecast the growing La Nina state in the Pacific 3 years ago, because the large El Nino oscillations seem to coincide with these Terminator events within 3 or 4 months. So, which is bizarre, but true. Other indicators that we may be right. Sunspot cycle 25 has started showing emergence at very high latitudes. And those of you that are scholars of solar physics or even solar stamp collecting, the higher latitude the early spots occur means that it's going to be a big cycle. Okay, so the tea leaves are also pointing big cycle. Are we there yet? Okay, so I'm trying to look at this myself. I'm going to go back to this plot of F10.7. Okay, and I'm looking for this step function. And what we've basically identified is that when the sun's monthly average F10.7 crosses through 90 SFU, you're basically there, right? So it goes through this step and it never doesn't come back for a long time. And so just last week, F10.7 crossed through 90 SFU. Okay, it's been trying for the last few rotations, and it's teetering around 90 right now. But the fact that it's hanging in there, and we actually have a lot of longitudinal structure on the sun, the stuff that I mentioned earlier about Rossby waves and the Gulf Stream and the jet stream, is all relevant to this conversation. Okay? So what happens is that the longitudinal, the bands on which the sunspots form actually develop longitudinal waves. And what we're basically seeing here is the start up of those longitudinal wave modes. So I'm watching this like a hawk. This last data point was at 0 UT today. So there's another sunspot group that's about to come across the limb of the sun that will make it bump up again. Now the question is, does it stay or does it recede? If it stays, we are watching like a hawk to see what happens at the sun's equator. If the equator dies, then we're in Terminator, and we will have a very good prediction of what cycle 25 is going to look like. But just for shits and giggles, I'm going to talk about Charles Tree. Okay? Just the last few slides and we can get questions. So you remember this plot from earlier. So these are the filaments, sunspots, butterfly pattern. I'm going to show you how powerful these Hale cycles are in terms of understanding the climatology of the sun. Now, Tree is famous for one statistical sleight of hand. Do any of you know what it is? It's called superposed epoch analysis. And this is basically how you determine it and how you look at the average weather on a given day at a given location. And you basically use the fact that the Earth's period is basically a year, and then you stack all your data up on a year timescale. You look at the statistical averages. That was Tree that developed that technique because he was looking for periodicities in sunspot cycles. He never found them because it's far too variable. And the other problem that we have with the sunspot cycle is, remember how I said it varies from 8 years length to 14 years length? People have tried for the best part of 100 years to associate geomagnetic activity to the sunspot cycle. The problem is that the sunspot cycle, if you listen to what I've been saying, the sunspot cycle is not the fundamental mode of the star. The Hale cycle is the fundamental mode, and the sunspot cycle is derived from it. So when you start to look at the Hale cycle, you should start to see patterns emerge, right? So if I can tell you when a Hale cycle starts and ends, then I should be able to turn this, what looks like random junk, into a coherent signal, okay? So I'm going to use the last 24 years of data, and if I can get my little zoom thing to appear over here, sorry, I made all disappear, sorry. This is one set of observations. So this is of the sun's corona, and it's 24 years of data, and I'm going to slice this based on the termination point. So you see, this is the most, this is the early data. So it's the blue, it's the red chunk, and then there's the blue chunk. So I'm taking the terminator plus or minus 11 years, and then I'm taking the green chunk, so here to here, and then the orange chunk. So this is the most current data, okay? And the sharp-eyed, those of you, will notice that the pattern appears to recur. The set of images on the right-hand side is from the sun's interior. So this is pathways that the magnetic field takes as it moves through the sun. And I do the same thing. So the sun's magnetic field on the inside is replicating itself on the outside of the star. That's no big shakes. But let me show you what happens to that pattern. Again, using Tree's technique. So if I start to roll an analysis window through the time series, and then I build a statistical average, you'll notice that there's a basic unit. Okay, that's only 24 years of data, however. Now, if I apply that same analysis trick to a record that I have of the sun's 5303 green line, so this is actually emission from iron 16 or 15 times ionized iron, so it's about 2.5 million degrees, you see the same thing. So I step through one window at a time, and I stack them all up, and I show you what the mean looks like. So if I can pause this, boom. That's the mean variation of that time series, right? It's beautiful. So basically, using these Hale cycles, I can decompose this nasty mess into something that makes sense. If I look at 140 years of my prominences, now this is a little bit more ratty, but you'll see that it does the same thing. Here's the coup de grace, the random sunspot butterfly pattern. Isn't so random when you know when it starts and ends. So again, if I take my analysis window through, butterfly, 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 one at a time, plus or minus 11 years around the termination point, I get to a beautiful pattern where all of those butterfly plots basically align on top of one another. Okay, so what it's basically telling you is that the Hale cycle is underlying all of this stuff. And just compare, sorry, this is flying through, but I'm going to step through this one at a time. So here's all these different diagnostics, okay? There's my butterfly diagram. Whoa, sorry. Lost control. Okay, here's my butterfly diagram. There's my schematic. There's sunspot butterfly. There's prominences. There's the coronal emission. There's my contemporary data. There's the model. Okay? So basically, when I go back here and show you the sunspots are truly only a portion of the whole. Now, my colleagues that are working on this problem only work from the sunspot record. They do not work from the rest of it, the other 10 years of overlapping stuff. So you can possibly imagine why this is a challenge. So anyway, to conclude, the 22-year Hale cycle is recurrent and robust. The bands of the Hale cycle have a definitive end that we've called the terminator. The terminator triggers growth of emergence of magnetism at about 30 degrees and about 55 degrees. We can get into why 55 degrees in a little bit, but it's pretty cool. Terminator sees a massive jump in solar proxies, like F10.7. Our 24 hypothesis is the bands of the Hale cycle contrive to modulate. It's an interference pattern, and that interference pattern basically sets the sunspot pattern that you get. Okay? Terminator separation is one measure of the interplay between the bands. Long terminator separation yields small amplitude cycles, and conversely, short separations give rise to big cycles. If the terminator happens soon, it means that sunspot cycle 25 could be huge. The relationship underestimates big cycles, so it could be actually bigger than huge. I don't know what that is. Gargantuan, massive, I don't know. Pick a better superlative. The terminators, the ends, the Hale cycle termination points provide a very good, robust plot to understand solar activity. And this is the crux, if from a solar physicist standpoint, is demonstrating that the sunspot cycle, what everyone has assumed to be a fundamental mode of the star, is a byproduct of the 22-year Hale cycle beneath it. Okay, that's something very important to take home. The terminator itself seems to be, if it's not going on right now, it's very, very close. But I would argue, as I said earlier, we are really not ready for a massive sunspot cycle. As someone that deals with this stuff, or have done at the kind of government level, nobody's prepared. They all think that the sun's in a steady decline. And I don't believe that's what the data is telling us. But anyway, with that, I will open up to...
Well, there we are. Now, for the benefit of anybody who missed the start of the presentation that we've just shown, I should explain that that was a recording that Scott made in November 2020 because he was unable to join us live. However, I believe that most of that presentation would have been probably pretty much as he would have delivered it, and he would have just added some things at the end to update it. But we thank him once again for that presentation. So Scott McIntosh, who's the Deputy Director of the National Center for Atmospheric Research based in Colorado in the States, and also thanks to the Front Range 6 Meter Group in Colorado who gave us permission to rebroadcast that. Now, although we don't have Scott here to answer any specific questions, we do have our resident propagation expert, indeed the chair of the RSGB Propagation Studies Committee, Steve Nichols G0KYA, and he's with us now. Steve, hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Everyone's still awake.
Well, yeah, actually, I mean, one of the things we can do is see how many people watch. And we do often lose sort of 10 or 20 people or so at the beginning, but actually we've got over 60 people watching live. And I know from history that, you know, that will be a few hundred people within a week or so, people who just, it's not convenient to watch it live. So it's a heavy subject. But I guess this is something, although you're not, you know, this is obviously Scott's theories based on lots of information, and I know it's not something you direct, but can I just ask you for your initial thoughts about his presentation?
Well, as you know, I spoke to you before we had the presentation, and I kind of dismissed it before I'd seen it. I think a lot of what he says makes sense. I'm just concerned that the way he's put the twist on it, that we're going to have a fantastic solar cycle 25. The thing is that there's the groups get together in America and all sit in a room and bash their ideas out and come up with a consensus. So 50 different groups come up with a consensus for what the solar cycle will do. And the consensus for solar cycle 25 is that it will probably be not a lot different to solar cycle 24, so not phenomenal. But that's 50 different groups coming together. So he's really putting himself out on a limb and saying that this is going to be a fantastic cycle. And, you know, basically come and see me in 2025 and we'll see. But I would urge caution to say that it's going to be a fantastic cycle, because there's plenty of people shaking their heads over in Noaa and NASA saying, no, that this isn't true at all. But I did some research looking at other solar cycles. I'd just like to show you if I can. Would that be okay?
Yeah, of course. You're going to share your screen, are you?
I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, all right. We're just going to have to do one little tiny thing, just an adjustment there, because I know no, that's okay. We could certainly do this. Tammy's now busy pressing buttons. I have actually done that already, Tammy. Yeah. This is just pressing some buttons here to allow us to share your screen and put it on another picture.
You should be able to share now, Steve.
By the way, can I just at this moment just tell people as well, if you've got any questions, general questions about propagation now, this would be a good time. We've got Steve here live, so and this is live now. It's coming up to what, 9 minutes to 9. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask, then ask them either on the BATC or on the Facebook in the usual way. Anyway, now going to see Steve's pictures, I think.
No, I haven't got your screen yet, Steve.
Have you shared your screen yet, Steve?
No, it won't let me.
It won't let you? Okay, I think we've given permissions.
Hang on, let me be back to meeting. Let's try again.
Okay.
No, it's greyed out. It won't let me do it.
That's odd, because we've done the same thing as we would normally do, isn't it?
Do that.
Okay, we're going to have a go at changing it now. As I said, this would be a great opportunity, though, if you're wondering about that. I noticed that someone had put a comment earlier on about a good opening on 6 meters today, I think. Have you got permission now?
You got it now?
Yep, sure.
All right, so now we can go back to Steve anyway. So remember, if you've got any questions at home, though, on general propagation, you're welcome to ask them.
So anyway, let's have a look at some of the information we've got. Just scroll through this. So this is where we are in cycle 25 at the moment. We're just at the bottom here, flicking up. Now, this is the prediction of where, this is the NASA/NOAA prediction on where we will go. So they're predicting a sunspot number of just over 100, maybe 110, 120, probably from the summer of 2025 to the autumn of 2025. So not that far away. But when you bear in mind that this is the last cycle, the one we've just gone through, so it's roughly the same. Now, what Scott was suggesting was in excess of 230. So he's saying it's going to be up here. So that is a pretty wild statement, to be honest. But something that I've been following for some time is that with the sunspots, I mean, yes, he talked about the 11-year sunspot cycle. He talked about the 23-year Hale cycle, which is the fact that sunspots are magnetically polarized. And to go a full cycle, so you go back to the polarization you started with, that's 2 cycles, basically 22, 23 years. But at the moment, what you're seeing a lot of is that the cycles or the spots in the northern hemisphere of the sun don't peak at the same time as the southern hemisphere. And I think that causes a lot of the problems. Now, if you look at the last solar cycle, you'll see that there's a peak there at 2012 and another peak there, 2014. And this is because the 2 hemispheres are not in phase. So you're getting a peak in one hemisphere, you're getting a peak in a second. But if you brought those peaks together, you would end up with a much, much higher figure. So I had a look at some previous sunspot cycles, and this is what I found. I mean, just one thing, though. This is a couple of shots of the sun. This was from February, and this is from May. This is today, actually. And in February, when the solar flux had gone up, you can see we've got a sunspot at the northern hemisphere there, and in the southern hemisphere exactly on the same latitude. But coming today, you'll see that the northern hemisphere, they're slightly south of that line, and in the southern hemisphere, it's further south from that line still. So in other words, I mean, this is just a snapshot, but it does look like the hemispheres are not quite in phase at this point. So if we then look forward, this was cycle 24. We talked about that earlier. You can see there's a double peak there. And the previous cycle to that was a peak there and then a peak there. So this is one of the hemispheres, and this is the other hemisphere. So again, the hemispheres are not in phase. Going back a bit further, solar cycle 19, which is known as a phenomenal solar cycle, you can see there that the sunspot number is over 200. This is the one everyone raves about. If we talk to any G3s, they'll tell you what it was like in, when was it? It was in 1958, I think it was. But look, there's only a single peak. So at that point, that sunspot cycle, I think they were actually in phase. The northern and southern hemisphere were in phase. And again, solar cycle 21, if we look at this, you've got a peak there, and you've got a peak slightly later just there. So they weren't in phase. So I think what would actually make solar cycle 25 a mega sunspot cycle would be if both of the hemispheres on the sun were in phase. And at the moment, it's probably too early to say whether they're in phase or not, because we haven't really got going. But if they are in phase, yes, he could be right. If they're not in phase, if one is starting a little bit sooner than the other, then they probably won't be. And the snapshot I took today of the sun shows that actually they're not in phase. One is slightly more advanced than the other. Whether that will pan out or not, I don't know. We'll have to wait 5 years to find out. But I thought you'd find that interesting. So I'm going to stop sharing that now and come back online. So there we go. So I suppose any questions now, really?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Steve. It's I didn't really expect you to do all of that. I did preview you with the link to the film, so I think you watched that a bit earlier, but we didn't expect much on there. And of course, Scott's not here to be able to reply or respond or whatever.
Well, I don't knock it. I mean, it's a solid piece of research. It's been peer reviewed, but it just seems at odds that you'd have 52 different groups saying no, it's average, and then this one theory puts it above all the others. But as I said, I could explain it if they are in phase. But so, whether they are or not, it's too early to say, I think.
Just another quick plug, though, for everybody at home, because so far we haven't had any questions or anything to ask you. And if this is a great opportunity, if you have a question, just ask it either on Facebook or on BATC now. Steve, I guess that what isn't of any disagreement between anybody is that the cycle is probably going to peak around 2025. That presumably is something that everybody agrees with?
Pretty much. I think, now it's got underway. I mean, it was a slow start getting up, but now if we take it from, say, November, December, add 5.5 years, that should take you to maximum. So that puts us into 2025 territory. Yeah. So
Right.
that does look, within 6 months or so, that looks about the point at which it will be a maximum. And just for those people who've not been amateurs in at the peak of a solar cycle, when you get the solar flux in excess of 200 like that, what you find is that 10 meters opens up around the world, virtually every day, and you end up getting fed up working people. You can work the States with 10 watts, just like that on sideband every single day. So it's conditions that you probably have never ever seen before. So it would be very much worthwhile to have it.
So I'm conscious that a lot of brand new amateurs, like you just mentioned, really have just joined the hobby in the last year, especially, and they won't really know what this is all about. They won't have seen different changes and trends and things. But what we can be fairly sure of then around 2025 is that we're going to see better conditions. It's just
absolutely
the disagreement maybe at the moment, or not disagreement, but just the different opinions is about how good that will be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But as I said, once the flux gets above 150, 170, 10 meters opens up, 6 meters actually opens up. Last solar cycle worked Canada on 6 meters, 50 megs, which is normally a short range band other than sporadic E conditions. So that's the sort of thing you can do. And as I said, you probably end up thinking, oh, well, this is just too easy. Why work this? So you probably work Australia on 5 watts
Wow.
FM. With 10 meters. So that's the sort of thing we could expect.
And fairly consistently then.
Yeah, every day.
Goodness, as you say, it would be a lovely problem to have, we think, at the moment, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
And those who maybe don't enjoy some of these digital modes like FT8 and things, then they can go back to other conventional modes like SSB and other modes like that, I guess, then as well. We have got a point which from our friend Chris Stanby, G0DWV, says, do I need a bigger beam or can I just revert to a dipole, he says.
I think that's very tongue-in-cheek, isn't it? Yeah, you definitely need a bigger beam, Chris. It's just what you've got. It's just nowhere near good enough,
Roger's put some of us have. I'm not quite sure.
I think maybe that was in reference to the some of us have lived through that cycle,
I see.
I think.
Right. Well, Roger was around in the 1850, the original, wasn't he? Probably. Sorry, I shouldn't say that.
1950s, not
1850.
1850s.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just remember, if you do put these comments on, they do take a little while. You're watching it on Facebook and YouTube is about 30 seconds or so behind, so we don't always get the context of it. So, I mean, we haven't got any real specific questions coming up yet. If you have got any questions, ask them now because we'll be shortly wrapping up if not. But Steve, just to ask you then, so right now though, where we are in 2021 May, so almost in the middle of the year, what are the bands to look out for in the next month or two? Where can we make some good contacts?
Well, the good news is that we're now in the sporadic E season. Now, sporadic E is nothing to do with sunspots. We best left to Jim Bacon to explain it, but it's a strange phenomena that we get on predominantly 10 meters and 6 meters, where you get incredibly strong signals, which are reflected off the E layer. So it's all kind of short skip. And then the last few days, you'll find that you can work Italy, Spain, Croatia, or even Scotland at times on 10 meters and 6 meters, with incredibly strong signal strengths. So that will carry on. It'll probably peak in about June and July and then tail off in August. So this is the time for sporadic E, absolutely. In fact, sporadic E can be so strong at times that you get it on 4 meters and also 2 meters. Now, 2 meter openings are very, very few and far between, but they are there. And you even get the odd situation, I've heard it a couple of times, where you'd be going down the motorway listening to Radio 2 on FM, and all of a sudden it just gets blotted out by some Spanish FM station. What the hell's going on here? And that's sporadic E. So it's incredibly strong, patchy, sort of, you might be able to hear the stuff, but 5 miles down the road they can't. But this is sporadic E in action. And Jim does a blog on propquest.co.uk. He's got something called the EPI, or the E's propagation indicator. It will show you where he thinks sporadic E openings will occur, to what countries, and how strong they will be. So this is definitely the season for sporadic E. Less so for F layer. so less for conditions that are driven by the sun, and sunspots. So what you will find is sporadic E takes over the upper HF bands, absolutely. And then as we head into autumn, the long-range F2 layer stuff comes back in. So once you get to September, you'll get long-range stuff into America. The bands will change again. Hopefully, we'll have a few more sunspots by then. But please don't get sporadic E confused with F layer, solar-powered, conditions, because a lot of people say, "Oh, yes, I've just worked, Italy, and there were 5 and 9. It must be conditions, fantastic. The sun's coming back to life again." Not really. No, sporadic E is a multifactorial mode, but it's nothing to do with sunspots. I think we can pretty much say that.
Okay. Just looking ahead then to 2025, it seems such a long way away, but although that might be where we get the peak of whatever that peak might be, does it mean that year on year we're going to start seeing conditions get better? So 2022 is going to be better than 21, etc.?
Yes, that's basically the way it works. We will, step up that curve. We'll be climbing that curve for the next 5 years now. So things should get better. We've been at sunspot minimum for some time now, and it's been pretty dire at times. But as we climb the curve, maximum usable frequencies will increase. So you'll find more openings on 12 meters, 10 meters, and up to 6 meters. And it's a good time to get a good antenna situation. I mean, a dipole, when conditions are that good, will work very, very well. If you put a little beam up for 6 meters, you can work across the pond on 6 meters, quite easly. At the moment, you can do that on 6 meters with sporadic E with double hop. So you get 2 hops to get across the Atlantic, and that will be possible, but not every day. But by the time we get to the peak of the sunspot cycle, yes, you can work across the pond with 5 watts through a dipole, to be honest. But if you could put a little beam up for 10 meters or 6 meters, you'll do even better.
You really do well, yeah.
So I think the point is to prepare yourself for what's coming. It's been dire for some time now. And, we'll be in a position where there's an awful lot more going on.
So a good time to get your antennas and things planned for the next year or two.
Absolutely.
So you're really ready for those peak conditions in 25.
Go on. I was just going to say, you can simulate what you'll be able to hear and work using a program like PredTest, which is the RSGB-sponsored propagation prediction program, or VOACAP. You can go to voacap.com, and you can put in, your sunspot number in there, put it in at about 20 for now, and then put it in at, say, 150, and you'll see the difference. You'll be able to see what you can work. I've got some graphs that show you the sort of, working across the states gets very, very easy on 10 meters as the sunspot number increases. And there's not just sideband, there are FM repeaters on 10 meters up at 29.6 and upwards, so 29.6, 6.2, 6.4, 6.6. And, I used to work, 10 meter repeaters in the States every day. And that's the sort of thing you can do with just a few watts, really.
I'll tell you what, maybe at the end of this, the next couple of days, you can drop me those links to those tools, because then it'll be nice to put those on the link of the follow-up information from this program. Before you go, though, we've got a couple of points now. I saw that Rodney earlier on had put down a note. Oh, I've just missed it now. Just here we are. Here we are. Yeah, Rodney G0KYA says, hello all. There was an aurora sitting on 6 meters today, and he heard a GM on a simple wire antenna. That was on 6.
I'm not surprised. The K index hit 7 today, which is very, very unusual. We were hit by the solar wind from a coronal hole, and it really, really pushed it up. Yeah. Yeah,
and he just added actually a note here saying some days on 20 and 30 meters, I have to check the antenna is still connected. Never known it's so bad. So there's the opposite.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, got a couple of questions for you. John Clark says, 10 meter SSB has lots of E's, QSOs right now. Well, that's G0JDL, John is.
Yeah, absolutely. Sporadic E. We're now entering the season. It started late April, early May. So it's now picking up. There were a couple of days ago, the band was open to all over the place on FT8. I didn't actually listen to the sideband section, but yeah, over the next few days, I think the peak is kind of late morning and then early afternoon, and then there's another peak sort of 5 or 6 o'clock. So that's the time to look, and you'll be amazed what you can work on 10 meters or 6.
Sure. And Roy G3ZIG, who I saw a note a couple of comments ago on Facebook saying it's his birthday today. So Roy, happy birthday. Many happy returns from all of us, and I'm sure from you as well, Steve.
Yeah, sure.
And he's put a note on here, sporadic E on CW on 50 megs at the moment. So that's a good place to go.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
But these tools like PropQuest and other tools as well that you're going to let us have links for, they're the ways to make the most out of your hobby at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, PropQuest will tell you about sporadic E. Absolutely. There's a blog that Jim updates every day. I think it's every day, every other day, that explains where he thinks the band will be open to and when. And just get on the air. If you don't listen, you'll never know. But you can hear all sorts on 10 meters. It will be open to Croatia, Italy, Spain, all over, and very strong signals as well. And even beacons, like 5-watt beacons, will be very, very audible on 10 meters this time of year. It's a good time. Well,
it's a great way to end with some great advice. Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight, Steve, and at very short notice as well. I know that as chair of the RSGB Propagation Studies Committee, you must have to be very busy at doing other things, but we're really grateful and we're very honoured to have you as our local member and our local expert that we can call on for things like this. And propagation, as well as your antenna system, I guess, is the best way to make the most out of our hobby at the moment, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, thank
you
very
very
much.
Sort your antennas out and get on the air, absolutely.
Definitely. Thanks very much for that, Steve. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye. There we are. That's Steve G0KYA, just rounding up our evening. And once again, I just want to thank Dr Scott McIntosh, who's the Deputy Director of the National Centre of Atmospheric Research, and also the Front Range 6 Metre Group, Colorado, for letting us reproduce the presentation that he gave. And Scott has promised that he'll come back and update the facts and things. So maybe I'm thinking maybe next year even might be good, because then we'll be another year ahead and we'll see how close he's still keeping his same predictions that we're going to have a cracking propagation in 2025. But thanks to all of those people for joining us. So this is almost the end of NARC Live tonight. Just to remind you what's happening on for NARC next week. On Sunday, we've got the GB Tourist Newsnet on GB3NB at 7 o'clock. On Monday, the 17th of May, is the Monday Night Net with a subject of electric vehicles, love them or loathe them. At 8 o'clock on Monday, we have the Tonight at 8 webinar, which is all about amateur radio direction finding. At 8:30 on Monday, the 80 metre CW Net. And on Wednesday, the 19th of May, here on NARC Live, 7:30, it's Springview, Wildlife and Nature Interactive Special. So please send us your pictures, your videos and everything else. And we're sure for a cracking, it was a really wonderful one that we did before, wasn't it, Tammy, about a year ago?
Yeah, it was.
Now, it was one of our most popular ones. So, and already some of you have sent things to me, which is wonderful, but please send us some more and we look forward to that. So all the regulars and any other news as well, send it to the usual address, radio@dcpmicro.com. Anything for the show, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. But from Tammy M0TC.
Goodbye.
And from me, David G7ERP, take care of yourselves and get on the air to care. Bye-bye.